The barn door slammed shut behind me. The sound echoed across the dark farmhouse field like thunder. I spun around quickly and grabbed the old lantern hanging on the wall. The yellow light shook in my hand as my heart started beating faster. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded small inside the huge barn. No one answered. But I knew someone had just closed that door, because I had left it wide open when I walked in. The wind outside was completely still. There was no storm. No reason for the heavy wooden door to move by itself. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps. From the dark corner of the barn. I lifted the lantern higher. The light touched the wooden floor, the hay bales, and the old farming tools hanging on the walls. But I didn't see anyone. Then the footsteps stopped. Right behind me. I slowly turned around. And that was when I saw the shadow. It was standing right next to the barn door. Tall. Too tall to be anyone I knew. The lantern light flickered across its shape, but I couldn't see its face. Just a long figure standing perfectly still. Watching me. My hand started shaking so badly the lantern nearly slipped from my grip. Then the shadow moved. And the barn door locked itself. That was the moment I realized something was very wrong with the farmhouse. But that wasn't even the worst part. Because the barn wasn't the only place on the farm where strange things were happening. Over the next few weeks, 4 disturbing events would happen on that property. 4 true farmhouse horror stories that still haunt me today. And it all started when my family moved into the old farmhouse outside a small town in Kansas. My name is Daniel Harper. When this happened, I was 17 years old. My parents had always wanted to live somewhere quiet. Somewhere far away from the noise of the city. So when my dad found an old farmhouse for sale, he was excited. "It's perfect," he said one evening while showing us pictures on his laptop. The house looked big and old, sitting in the middle of a huge field. Behind it was a tall red barn. There were cornfields stretching across the land, and a long dirt road leading to the house. My mom smiled. "It looks peaceful." My younger sister, Lily, looked less excited. "It looks creepy," she said. Dad laughed. "It's just old. That's all." A month later, we moved in. The farmhouse was bigger than it looked in the pictures. It had 2 floors and a large porch in the front. Inside, the floors creaked when you walked on them. The walls were covered with old wooden panels. The place smelled like dust and old wood. But the fields outside were beautiful. For the first few days, everything felt normal. We unpacked boxes. My dad fixed the broken fence around the barn. My mom cleaned every room in the house. Lily and I explored the property. Behind the house, the barn stood tall and quiet. Its red paint was faded and chipped. "Let's check inside," I told Lily. She shook her head quickly. "No way." "Why not?" "It feels weird," she said. I rolled my eyes and walked to the barn door. It creaked loudly when I pushed it open. Inside, the barn was huge. Sunlight came through small holes in the wooden walls. Dust floated in the air. There were old farming tools leaning against the walls and stacks of hay in the corners. Nothing looked dangerous. Just old. "See?" I called to Lily. "It's fine." She slowly stepped inside. But she stayed close to the door. "Let's not stay long," she said. As we walked through the barn, I noticed something strange. There were fresh footprints in the dirt floor. They looked new. Like someone had been walking there recently. But that didn't make sense. The farm had been empty before we moved in. "Maybe the real estate agent came here," I said. But Lily looked worried. "Those footprints look big." That night was when the first strange thing happened. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly. At first I didn't know why. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow footsteps. Coming from downstairs. I sat up in bed and listened carefully. The footsteps walked across the living room. Then they stopped. Then I heard a chair move. My stomach tightened. Maybe it was my dad. But something about the sound felt wrong. I slowly got out of bed and walked to my bedroom door. The hallway was dark. I stepped quietly toward the stairs. As I reached the top step, I looked down into the living room. The moonlight coming through the window lit part of the room. And that's when I saw the rocking chair. It was moving. Back and forth. Slowly. But nobody was sitting in it. I froze. The chair creaked again as it rocked. Back. And forth. My heart was beating hard in my chest. Then the rocking stopped. And the chair turned slightly. Like someone had just stood up from it. I rushed back to my room and locked the door. The next morning I told my parents what happened. My dad laughed. It was probably the wind, he said. But there were no open windows downstairs. And that same day, something else happened. Lily came running inside from the yard. Her face was pale. "What's wrong?" Mom asked. Lily pointed toward the barn. "There's someone in there." Dad frowned. "What do you mean?" "I saw someone walking inside the barn," Lily said. Dad grabbed his flashlight. "Let's go check." We all walked toward the barn together. The door was closed. Dad opened it slowly. The barn was empty. But the dirt floor had fresh footprints again. And they weren't ours. Dad looked confused. "Maybe someone is cutting through the property," he said. But that explanation didn't make me feel better. Because that night, I heard the footsteps again. This time they weren't downstairs. They were outside my bedroom window. Slow. Dragging. Walking back and forth in the yard. Then the footsteps stopped. Right outside the window. I held my breath. And slowly, something scratched across the glass. Then a voice whispered from outside. "Daniel." My blood ran cold. Because nobody outside the house should have known my name. And when I slowly pulled the curtain aside to look, there was a face staring at me from the darkness. The face outside my window disappeared the moment I jumped back. I stumbled away from the curtain so fast I almost fell over my chair. My heart was beating so hard that it felt like it might burst. For a few seconds I just stood there, frozen in the middle of my room. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just a shadow. But then the whisper came again. "Daniel." The voice was soft and slow. Right outside my window. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the small flashlight from my desk. I walked slowly back toward the window. Every step felt heavy. My mind was screaming at me not to look again. But I had to know. I slowly pulled the curtain open. The yard outside looked empty. Just the quiet field behind our house and the dark outline of the barn standing far away. No face. No person. Nothing. I stood there staring for almost a full minute. Then suddenly, scratch. Something dragged across the window again. I jumped back. This time the scratching came from the bottom of the glass. Like someone's fingernails sliding slowly across it. Scratch. 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 I turned off my flashlight and stepped away from the window. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning I told my parents everything. My mom looked worried. But my dad still didn't believe me. "Probably a raccoon or a branch," he said. "A raccoon that knows my name." I asked. Dad didn't answer that. But Lily spoke up. "I heard something too," she said quietly. Everyone looked at her. "What did you hear?" Mom asked. "Footsteps outside my room," Lily said. Dad rubbed his forehead. "All right," he said. "Tonight I'll check around the house before bed." That evening things felt normal again. We ate dinner together. Dad watched TV in the living room. Mom read a book on the couch. Lily and I finished our homework at the kitchen table. For a while it felt like maybe the strange things were over. But around 9 p.m. the power suddenly went out. The whole house went dark. Lily gasped. "What happened?" Dad stood up. Probably a blown fuse. He grabbed a flashlight and walked to the basement. The rest of us waited in the dark kitchen. The house felt strange without electricity. The silence felt heavier. After a few minutes, Dad called from the basement. Power should be back in a minute. But it didn't come back. Instead we heard something outside. A loud metal clang. It came from the direction of the barn. Mom frowned. "What was that?" Dad came back upstairs. "Probably the wind moving something," he said. But when he opened the back door to check, the wind wasn't blowing at all. The night was perfectly still. Dad grabbed a lantern from the kitchen. "I'll go check the barn," he said. "I'm coming," I said quickly. He nodded. Mom stayed inside with Lily while Dad and I walked toward the barn. The field looked darker than usual without the house lights. The barn stood ahead of us like a giant shadow. When we reached the door, Dad pushed it open slowly. The lantern light filled the inside. Everything looked normal at first. The hay bales, the old tools, the empty stalls. But then Dad noticed something on the dirt floor. Fresh footprints again. Big ones. Bigger than before. They started near the barn door and led deeper into the building. Dad followed them slowly. The footprints stopped near the far wall, right in front of an old wooden ladder that led up to the hayloft. Dad lifted the lantern higher. "Someone's been in here," he said quietly. Before I could answer, we heard something above us. A soft movement, like someone shifting their weight. Dad and I both looked up at the hayloft. The lantern light barely reached the top, but we could see the edge of the wooden floor above us. Then a piece of hay slowly fell down. My chest tightened. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Dad nodded slowly. Someone was up there. Dad placed the lantern on a wooden crate and began climbing the ladder. "Stay down here," he said. I didn't argue. Each step of the ladder creaked as he climbed higher. The barn felt colder suddenly. Dad reached the top and lifted the lantern. The light spread across the loft. For a few seconds nothing happened. Then Dad froze. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just stared at something in the darkness. Then suddenly, bang! The barn door slammed shut behind me. I spun around in shock. The door had been wide open. Now it was closed tight. The lantern flickered. "Dad!" I called. But before he could answer, we heard something else. Heavy footsteps running across the hay loft above. And they were running straight toward the ladder. The footsteps above us were fast. Too fast. They ran across the wooden floor of the hay loft with loud, heavy thuds. Thud, thud, thud. Straight toward the ladder where my dad was standing. "Get down!" I shouted. Dad quickly climbed down the ladder. He almost slipped in his rush and jumped the last step, landing beside me. The footsteps stopped right above us. For a moment the barn went silent again. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Dad slowly picked up the lantern and raised it higher toward the loft. The light shook in his hand. "Who's up there?" he called out. No answer. Just the quiet rustling of hay. Dad walked closer to the ladder again. But before he could climb, a long arm slowly appeared from the edge of the loft. It hung down over the side like something was feeling the air. My stomach twisted. The arm looked wrong. Too thin. Too long. And the fingers were stretched out like spider legs. Dad grabbed my shoulder and pulled me backward. "Run," he whispered. We turned and rushed to the barn door. Dad pulled the handle. But the door didn't move. It was stuck. Or something was holding it shut from outside. "Push," Dad said. We both pushed hard against the door. It creaked but barely moved. Behind us we heard a slow scraping sound. Something dragging across the wooden loft floor. I didn't want to look. But I did. The creature was climbing down the ladder. Slowly. Its arms and legs bent in strange ways. Its head tilted sideways like it didn't understand how bodies worked. Its skin looked pale and stretched. But the worst part. It was smiling. A wide, empty smile. And when it spoke, the voice sounded exactly like mine. "Daniel, don't leave." My heart nearly stopped. Dad grabbed a metal shovel leaning against the wall. "Stay behind me," he said. The creature stepped off the ladder. It was tall. Much taller than a normal person. Its long arms almost touched the ground. It took a slow step toward us. Then another. "Daniel," it said again. But this time the voice changed. Now it sounded like Lily. "Brother, help me." Dad swung the shovel. The metal hit the creature's shoulder with a loud clang. But the creature didn't fall. It only stepped back and tilted its head again. Like it was curious. Then suddenly it moved. Fast. Too fast to see clearly. It lunged toward us. Dad shoved me aside and blocked it with the shovel. They crashed into a stack of hay bales. The lantern fell and rolled across the floor. Shadows jumped across the barn walls. "Run to the house," Dad shouted. I didn't want to leave him, but I ran. I finally forced the barn door open and sprinted across the dark field toward our house. The whole time I could hear loud crashing behind me inside the barn. I burst through the back door. "Mom!" I yelled. Mom and Lily rushed toward me. "What happened?" Mom asked. "There's something in the barn." Just then Dad came running out of the darkness behind me. He slammed the door shut and locked it. Everyone stood there breathing hard. For a few seconds nothing happened. Then we heard something outside. Slow footsteps walking across the grass. Toward the house. Thump, thump, thump. Lily grabbed Mom's arm. "It's coming here." The footsteps stopped right outside the back door. We could hear breathing now. Slow. Heavy. Dad grabbed a baseball bat from the hallway. Nobody spoke. Then the door handle slowly turned. Once. Twice. But the door stayed locked. We waited. The breathing stopped. The footsteps slowly walked away. After a long time Dad carefully looked out the window. The yard was empty again. No footprints. No shadow. Nothing. The police came later that night. Dad told them everything. They searched the barn and the fields. But they didn't find anything. The footprints in the dirt had disappeared. The ladder looked normal. And the barn door was working fine. The officer shook his head. "Probably an animal," he said. But Dad didn't believe that. Neither did I. The next morning the sun was bright and warm. Everything looked peaceful again. The barn stood quiet in the field. Like nothing had ever happened there. But when I walked past the kitchen mirror that afternoon, I froze. Something was written on the glass behind me. 3 words. Written in fog like someone had breathed on the mirror. "Daniel." I waited. I slowly turned around. The kitchen was empty. But outside the window, near the edge of the cornfield, I saw a tall shape standing still, watching the house. And it was smiling again.